And the Mahayana, is this on or do I turn it on? It's on, okay. In the Mahayana tradition, when someone teaches Dharma, they recite to themselves the verse from the Diamond Sutra that life is like a mirage, a bubble, a flash of lightning in the sky. Those 6 famous images, then they snap the fingers. And it's to remind ourselves that all things are empty of self-nature, empty of existing in the manner of appearance. All things are impermanent and in a state of flux, and so forth. And in this way, the teacher, the one speaking about Dharma, understands that between the one speaking of Dharma, the one listening to Dharma, and the Dharma being taught, all those the 3 circles, are empty of self-nature. Without a Dharma listener, there's no Dharma teacher. Without Dharma teacher, there's no Dharma listener. Without Dharma, there's no Dharma teacher or listener. In that same way, with all phenomena on the earth and all phenomena throughout the universe, all things lack separate nature, self-nature. Nagarjuna put it another way: all things are interdependent arisings with no findable status. The status we give to them is purely mingtang tokpe takbar tak sam, purely a sense, a concept, a label. And so at the beginning of every Dharma talk, usually the Dharma teacher thinks that to himself and snaps the finger to think, oh, thank goodness you guys came. Otherwise, when Professor introduced me as Dharma teacher, it wouldn't be correct. With no listeners, no Dharma teacher. I should also thank Buddha for Dharma, because with no Dharma, no listeners, and no Dharma teacher. I was asked to introduce something on the nature of Tibetan Buddhism. Actually, that's a new word, a Western word, Tibetan Buddhism. There's no word in traditional Tibetan literature saying Tibetan Buddhism. They call it a number of things. One is Nongbe Chu, means inner Dharma. Inner meaning the way of enlightenment that goes perfectly at the center between denying reality and fabricating reality. In other words, a kind of a often these two are translated as nihilism and eternalism, but it really means a kind of a stubbornness which refuses to notice what is, and reification or a manufacturing of a false view, or a false way of seeing, a false way of being. But for that reason, the middle way has the sense that one is always looking or examining one's own being, one's own understanding, one's own position, one's own sense of life, one's own way of expressing, a way of being human. So often we think Madhyamaka a kind of a philosophy or something like that, and like anything it can become a philosophy, but it's really talking about how you yourself, how I myself in my life transcend those habits of manufacturing beliefs And even though they fly in the face of reality, we stubbornly cling to them. Or we're kind of a lazy mind that doesn't notice what's happening, and therefore we don't get it. Although Tibetans use that word, Nang Becho, the spiritual approach, which sits at the center between manufacturing beliefs and ignoring Dharma factors, ignoring Dharma realities. I think if we look at the way Dharma spread to different countries, every country has its own history. Tibet had the kind of advantage that it was immediately to the north of India, and in particular, whenever there were wars and fighting in India, any disruption, and also disasters like floods and famines, people's masters and many Buddhists would run to the Himalayas. Actually, the old word for Tibet is Gangchen, literally means Himavat, which is the name of the Himalaya mountains. And so because Tibet was immediately to the north of India, it had about 1,500 years of prolonged and continual exposure to the lineages of India. As a result, the number of scriptures translated from India languages, mostly Sanskrit, into Tibetan is larger than the number from any other country. Over 1,000 sutras by the Buddha and 5,000 or 6,000 works by the later Indian masters. And this happened because they were immediately bordering India. The upside is that the Tibetans have, if you will, the most complex form of Indian Buddhism. Are you chilly? If you're chilly, I can lend you mine. You see, these things, the tantric shawl is made from raw silk. And so, being silk, it's very warm and toasty. So being immediately next to India, therefore, they have about 15 years of that, 100 years of that continual contact. The upside is the wide diversity of lineages in Tibetan Buddhism. The downside is there's so much in it that sometimes it's difficult to find the trees for the forest and the forest from the trees. Everything in Tibet is about lineage. There's some thousands of lineages coming from India, and they're all what Tibetans call menga, oral transmission lineages. So ways great Indian masters put together packages of Dharma and transmitted them to their disciples. And those specific lineages became carried into Tibet and spread among certain numbers of Central Asians. Tibet in the 7th and 8th century became the largest continual land empire in Asia or Europe, maybe surpassed by the Incan Empire in South America in size, but nothing in Asia or Europe became as large as the Tibetan Empire at that time. Went down to the bottom of Nepal and all the way up to the Mongol lands, across the Silk Road, west to pretty well to Afghanistan, and east to a couple of hundred miles east of Chengdu. And so it was a very enormous piece of property. And the language, and therefore it spread, the Tibetan culture and language and literature spread through those many hundreds of kingdoms of that territory. Then in the 13th century, the great Mongolian Buddhist emperor Kublai Khan, who I think he also came to Korea, with the Koreans kind of have mixed opinions on him. But he came to Korea and he made Tibetan alphabet, or the Tibetan script, the national script of his whole country, whole empire. And at that time, his empire went all the way from the tip of Korea throughout China, throughout the Mongol regions, all through Tibet, through Afghanistan, through to East Persia. And so Tibetan script went all of that area, and he made Tibetan Buddhism the national religion, or the lineages from Tibet written in the Tibetan script, the national religion. And he banned the use of the Chinese script for intellectual or spiritual usages. It could be used for, writing food recipes and things like that, or writing back and forth between people's private letters. It could be used for government script, although he also introduced a national government script, Old Mongolian, coming from Genghis Khan, which was the official script used at that time. And in fact, here in Korea, I think in Sangwangsa Monastery, they still have a letter from him exempting them from taxes and other kind of duties. So when we say Tibetan Buddhism, it really refers to the form of Buddhism came from India into central Himalayan regions, spread over the centuries to Pakistan, Afghanistan, across the Silk Road, Khotan, up into Mongolia, up into Siberia. So today, if you go to Siberia, all the monasteries in Siberia chant their texts in Tibetan. They use the Tibetan script as their spiritual script, and so forth. And that, even though they developed in a large number of schools, or chulug, a Tibetan name chulug, maybe 10 or 12 main schools of Buddhism, those schools are 90% the same. But when they speak of Menga, or oral transmissions, within the schools, they all have slightly different stuff coming from India, slightly different repackaging. But I think one of the most popular and widespread is that known as Lojong. As all of you know, I'm sure that the word sun comes from Chinese chan, which comes from the Sanskrit jan, or dhyana, which in Tibetan is samden. And samden means stabilized mind, something like that in Tibetan, stabilized mind. Sampa means contemplation, and temba means stable. The word Lojong is a little bit like that. Lo means mind, like some, very much like some, as a sense of mind. But Jong, rather than stabilize, has the meaning of transform, change. So something like change your mind. Meaning has that. And it's a tradition coming to Tibet, brought in by the great 11th century Bengali master Atisha, known to Tibetan as Jogopelden Atisha, or Atisha Dipankara Srijnana. The brilliant light of wisdom. Buddhist names are always very nice. Like my Buddhist name is Maitri Zopa, which means like patient love. Because I'm Irish, having the name patient, it's like Paddy, so it works for me, and love is always a good thing. Irish tend to be very loving. So Buddhist names are usually something like that, glorious light shining with wisdom. So that was his name. At his time, towards the end of the golden period of Buddhism in India. Already the invasions from Persia and from the north had started to weaken Indian society. But he traveled all over India and gathered all of what he thought were the strongest lineages. And then he went down to Indonesia. And Indonesia at the time was one of the greatest repositories of Mahayana Buddhism, especially those Mahayana lineages from central India, from the Bodh Gaya area, Calcutta, Orissa, those areas that had been the great sort of hotbeds of Buddhist enlightenment for many centuries. And even the dynasty in Indonesia took the name from the Indian kings, Palas. And if you go there today, I think today the greatest Buddhist monument in the world, stupa in the world, is probably Borobudur in central Java, if any of you ever get the chance to go there. It has a wonderful story. It was kind of lost in the jungle, and the jungle grew up over it, and it was protected for 500 years, essentially by being hidden. And then Atisha went down there and gathered those lineages that had left India and existed only in Indonesia, put them all together in a package. And his idea, his thinking is that although Buddha taught 84,000 dharmas, Buddha gave 84,000 teachings, they really come down to two things. And they come down through two main lines. One is the wisdom teaching of Nagarjuna, and the other is the vast bodhisattva way of a sangha. So that he sort of identifies these as the two main lineages that are prevalent throughout all of India and all of Indonesia. And he put them together. And the way he put them together became known as Lojong. And in that, essentially, it was a practice tradition as opposed to an intellectual tradition. Like if you read Nagarjuna's 6 works on reasoning, they're very intellectual. So it's not looking at Nagarjuna from the intellectual side, but instead purely from the meditation side. And again, if you read a Sangha and the works of a Sangha, Maitreya Nath, the 5 great treatises of transcribed by a Sangha from visions of Maitreya, there are very highly intellectual and complex texts. But in the Lojong, the intellectualism is dropped out, and it's made as a pure, simple practice tradition. And the Dalai Lama once commented that if we were to talk, Tibetans get a little irritated at when there was a book written in the early 1900s called Lamaism, and it made it sound like Tibetan Buddhism was different than the rest of Buddhism, written by a British military man, so he wasn't really a great scholar. But so Tibetan Buddhism became known as Lamaism, and it always irritated Tibetans because it makes it sound like it's something different than Buddhism. But Dalai Lama said that if anything were to be Lamaism, it would be those lineages from Atisha, the great master Atisha, that combine Nagarjuna's wisdom teachings with Asanga's vast bodhisattva ways teaching. And this became the basis of all schools of Tibetan Buddhism. So although many schools of Buddhism existed in Tibet before Atisha came, his teachings essentially spread to all those schools and became the foundations. So Lojong means that, transforming or changing your mind in 2 ways. One is becoming more emptiness-wise, wise in emptiness, and the other more bodhisattva-like. So you could say those are the 2 aims of every Mahayana Buddhist, from the Tibetan way of thinking about things and from the way that Nagarjuna and Asanga in ancient India thought about things, the way Atisha thought about things. So Lojong is essentially a spiritual technology for growing our emptiness wisdom and growing our universal love, compassion, bodhisattva, spirit, consciousness, something like that. In Tibet, there's a collection known as 100 Lojongs, which is the sort of I think there's about 50 in it, but Tibetans always round up to the nearest 100. So it's called the 100 Lojongs. But it's 100 little, 50 or 40 or 50 little texts, mostly by Atisha and immediate disciples of Atisha in Tibet. And they sort of package that Lojong lineage, each of them in slightly different ways. The one that I had translated into Korean, and one he was the translator of that, and at the back Pundarika, who has a Dharma center near her. She published it, as known as the 7-point or 7, how to change your mind in 7 steps, or something like 7 tips on how to change the mind. All of those Lojong have the idea that humans have 2 main problems, 2 main obstacles to enlightenment. Like if you walk up to someone and say, would you like to be enlightened? Most people would say, sure, great, thanks, how? So from Lojong's side, there's two things we have to do to become more enlightened, become fully enlightened. One of those has to do with sense of self, sense of separate self. Sense of separate self of oneself, when you perceive someone else, sense of separate self of that person, and when you perceive objects, a sense of separate self of objects. Like a table looks like it's separate from the universe, stars look like they're separate from the universe, and so on. Later Buddhism referred to this as kind of the glimmer of duality, or the shadow of duality. The way that things seem to have separate nature. We seem to live in a disconnected and disjointed universe. So to be more enlightened, the first thing we have to notice is that this appearance of duality, this appearance of separateness, is in fact mere appearance. Mere appearance for the sake of convenience. In reality, nobody is separate from anything. We breathe in air from all over the universe, and we take in sunlight and starlight from all over the universe, and we eat foods, solid foods, which are earths from the universe, and we drink water, which is from all over the universe, and so on. There's nothing about our body separate from the rest of the universe. In terms of our consciousness, similarly, yesterday's thought, the present moment thought came from the last moment thought, 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 and leads to next thought, next thought, next thought, next thought, next thought, next thought, for infinity. In other words, both body and mind stretch completely to infinity at all times. Because infinity is slightly unmanageable to the conceptual mind, we have to get a handle on things. So in a way, the sense of a separate self is like the handle on a suitcase. It's a way we pick up the whole universe. And we can't really get the grips around the whole universe just pump like that. But by taking the suitcase by the handle, we can manage to get our stuff in and out of the train and get onto the train and off of the train and so forth. So this idea that what is the self? Mingtan tope takpar taksam. The self is a mere sense of who and what I am, generated conceptually and through labels for the purpose of convenience. When I leave here, I need to find my actual car and not get arrested for driving away in your car. I have to go home with my friends to get to the right home, and you have to go home with your friends to get to the right home, and so forth. It's just a kind of a handle on a suitcase to managing the vast ocean, navigating the waters of the vast ocean of infinity. So the first training in Lojong is essentially looking at the beyond self nature. Now this word anatma in Sanskrit, often no self, no soul. I think English is a little bit of a harsher language. If we say no self, no soul, it makes it a little bit, gives us a harder sense of things than what is intended, in my opinion, by Buddha with anatma, or in Tibetan by Dakmeba. You can say no solid self, no separately existing self, no self-existent, substantial, unchanging self, and so on, something like that. So it's said that this sense of self as a separate entity is the biggest cause of all unhappiness in the universe. Because of my sense of separateness, I get lonely. I think I need particular things. If I don't get those specific things, then I feel unhappy. Feeling unhappy, I do things to improve my happiness. But because that first mistake of the cause of my unhappiness isn't necessarily needing a particular thing. It's the GPS on your car is set to the wrong address. It carries you to the wrong place. The Buddhist way of saying it would be your sense of self, because you have a fictitious or a false sense of self. Therefore, when you navigate to happiness, you're doing it on the basis of trying to satisfy a false self, a wrong sense of self. It cannot have a happy result. It cannot have an enduring, profound result. It's going to be very limited, just to satisfying a particular need at a particular time. Until we melt that sense of duality, until we melt that sense of separateness, everything we do is always going to be kind of like, President Bush and President Obama's attempts to solve the deficit problem. Just patching here and patching there and patching here and patching there. And in patching here and patching there, we make other problems. We create other problems. So this search for, you could say, in a bit of a heretical Buddhist linguistic, the search for the real self, or authentic being, or something like that. Now, Buddha didn't like to use that word, real self, because when we say real self, again, it kind of reinforces this sense of something which is permanent, fixed, findable, and separate. Whereas, who am I? What am I? That deeper nature is referring to something connected to infinity. Something connected to infinity. So in the Lojong teaching, the lineage of Nagarjuna is how we practice so as to notice our infinity nature. And here, in the introduction to Lojong text, in 7 points, it says, the first Lama says, if students are of highest quality, first teach the secret thing. Now, this secret thing is referring to the non-duality or emptiness nature. It's called secret because nobody knows it. I mean, ordinary people don't know it. One doesn't notice it. The nature of the table is emptiness, but beings don't look at the table and think, hey, there's emptiness. So therefore, in the Heart Sutra, it says form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness not other than form. But we look at a table, we see a table, don't we? We don't see emptiness. And because we don't see it, therefore, it's secret. It's a well-kept secret. Infinity is in all things are connected directly to infinity, nothing has separate nature. It's a secret. It's a secret because it doesn't appear to the senses. The senses are programmed to see things and process them as separate entities, rather than to process them as infinite, as aspects or reflections of infinity. For highest beings, teach emptiness first, and for ordinary beings, teach the vast bodhisattva way first. So the Lojong text makes that recommendation. Now, because all Tibetans tend to be, in Atisha's day, all Tibetans were a little bit on the barbaric side. They were a warsome bunch. They always liked a good rumble. And so the most Lojong texts in the Tibetan world teach the bodhisattva way first, not the emptiness way. Thinking that on the basis that, and also I think, for the Western people, we tend to be a little bit of a overconfident bunch. We're like extremely self-confident. So if we hear like the best should study emptiness first, and like mediocres and lower characters should study bodhisattva way first, we will immediately sign up for the emptiness. You know, only as kind of tongue-in-cheek would we buy a book called Buddhism for Dummies. We think we're being smart buying Buddhism for Dummies. We're not actually noticing that we're calling ourselves a dummy by buying a book called Something for Dummies. So in the West, whenever they advertise, when I go on teaching tours around North America, when they advertise any of my lectures or workshops or weekend retreats, they always say, the highest lineage from blah, 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 blah. And they always have to make it very superlative. Whereas the Tibetan side is kind of the opposite. It's like, whoa, well, let's see, if that's for the highest, what's for like the lowest? I'll sign up for that. It's a little bit like a work program, the voluntary work program. You know, if you could sign up for voluntary work, to work like 100 hours a week, or you can sign voluntary work to work an hour a week. I think most white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans would sign up for the 100 hours a week. And about a few months later, they'd be going, oh, damn. And your average Tibetan would think, well, I'll start with the hour a week. And when I'm comfortable with that, I'll like increase it to 2 hours a week. And when I'm uncomfortable with that, I'll increase it to 3 hours a week. And maybe after 10 years or something, I'll get up to the 100 hours a week. So it's kind of a different kind of mentality, our kind of way of, I think it's because maybe coming out of colonialism or something like that. You know, we sort of developed this sense of overconfidence, really. But so most of the Lojong texts present, rather than the emptiness thing first, they present the vast bodhisattva way first. So what's the second great obstacle to enlightenment? It's the sense of kind of, I'm more important than anyone. You know, if I'm in my family, I'm the most important person in my family. We have that as a kind of a feeling. We cherish, the Tibetan word for it is literally chesin, which means self-cherishing, but it literally means loving yourself more than you love another person. Cherishing yourself more than you cherish someone else. So from point of view of kind of deep wisdom, you could say, or universal wisdom, the emptiness, or the beyond self nature, is the key to enlightenment. From the point of view of harmony with the conventional world, without understanding the deeper nature of infinity, this aspect of learning to cherish, be less self-cherishing and more appreciative of others, is the big key. So most Tibetans like to start with that, sort of the meditations on love, compassion, and so on and so forth. Each of the 50, i.e. 100 of the Lojong texts speak about these slightly different. The 7-point Lojong suggests that we start simply by cultivating a mind of equanimity. In the beginning of spiritual practice, we tend to like people who are nice to us, and dislike people who are rude or mean to us, and not care much about those people in between. We kind of divide the world into three like that. Like, oh yeah, here's a good egg. Yeah, here's a good head. That guy is a real rectum, and so on. We kind of like make people in those three categories. And it's all based on kind of superficial connections. You know, like Chinese all dislike Dalai Lama because he doesn't like the communist government. Or North Koreans don't like South Koreans because of there's two countries and two different political systems based on very ephemeral or very superficial conditions. And it happens, when you're a kid in kindergarten, and it happens when you go to school, and it happens when you go to college, and it happens in the workplace, and it just always happens throughout your life if you don't actually watch the process. So from the point of view of relaxing self-centeredness or self-cherishing or something like that, me first, I'm the most precious. From the point of view of softening that. Now, for ordinary people, this is actually a bigger obstacle to their happiness than is the emptiness factor. Or you could not bigger, but you could say more immediate. Emptiness is, to get benefits of emptiness meditation, it's not an overnight affair. You have to basically train in meditation, develop a little bit of samadhi power, a little bit of deep concentration power, and then sit with cross-legged and watch rising and falling. And not everyone can just get it like pump, like immediately off the spot. And therefore you sit and try it, and you may not actually get much benefits from the emptiness side, unless you have, in Buddhism we'd say, unless you have instincts from a previous life. Like, two of Buddha's students met him in the morning at 10 o'clock, and they achieved enlightenment by noon. And so that's instincts from a previous life. And others, like the tardy Ananda, practiced under the Buddha for 45 years and only achieved his nirvana like the day before Buddha passed away. So it's like these things are kind of although all beings have some quality of equalness, not all beings are created equal in this lifetime. I don't know if any of you saw that great movie that's out right now on Lincoln, when they're arguing over the 13th Amendment and getting rid of slavery, and they try and put one of the Republicans who's trying to say that all beings are born equal. And so they try to force him, and he's arguing with a Democrat who at that time was pro-slavery. All the Democrats were pro-slavery. All the Republicans were against slavery. So he's arguing with them, and he says, "Now, don't you accept that all people are created equal?" The Democrat's saying. And he wants to force the Republican to say yes, meaning blacks would be equal to whites, which would mean it would split the Republican and the Democrat Party, so they wouldn't be able to get the amendment passed. And so Tommy Lee Jones, playing the congressman, says, "Well, actually, I couldn't say that all people are born equal because you are proof that they're not." So from Buddha's point, we all come into life with certain baggage. And therefore, some people very easily get spiritual results, and other people more slowly get spiritual results. Emptiness is more difficult to get spiritual results. That side of the training is more subtle. And for that reason, the first Dalai Lama says, only teach it to those, as a first thing, only teach it to those who are, Wangpo Rab is a Tibetan expression, but it just means high karma, have high karma background. In other words, they did some of that kind of practice in previous lives, and they're ready for a push over the cliff of emptiness in this lifetime. Others start with with the love, compassion, and this kind of relative bodhicitta, as called in Tibetan, the kind of bodhisattva spirit training. And so, usually in the Tibetan world, that starts by trying to contemplate how we divide people into good, bad, and indifferent. I like, I don't like. Literally, like my friend, my enemy, and the stranger. A warm feeling, a repulsive feeling, a repelled feeling, and kind of a cool feeling, something like that. And they like to contemplate how people are always changing. We notice how people always change. Like someone we like, later we don't like. And someone we don't like, later we like. Strangers become friends, or they can become disliked people. And also friends and enemies can become strangers. But these roles that we play with others are always something in a state of flux. Now, on the other hand, all beings have the same wish for happiness. You want happiness, I want happiness. You want pleasure, I want pleasure. We all want that same thing. So what's the difference? You have a right to happiness, you have a right to pleasure, same as I have a right to happiness, I have a right to pleasure. So why the ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs? Moreover, even in this lifetime, we can think of many people who were friends who now we don't like, many people, and who we don't even know where they are or what became of them, and many people who we didn't like and now we're okay with, and so on. And if all people have that right to happiness, and why do we like some and not like others? Because these sort of superficial exchanges. And so we sort of contemplate in that kind of way, and try to do it day by day in a very specific way. Like at the end of the day, think, who is nicest to me today? Who is worse to me today? And who just kind of walked down the street and I didn't hardly notice? And try to notice that emotional tone. And notice how the emotional tone influences how we project with that person, and how we relate to that person, how we emote in that person's presence. Like if someone walks up to you whom you really like, you have immediately a very warm feeling, a very big smile. And someone you don't like walks up, immediately the mood changes and there's this sort of icy presence comes over you, and kind of an icy emoting that goes out in the way you relate to that other person. Or perhaps you'll be more politically correct and it'll just become kind of obnoxious, condescending way of smiling and being and so on. So in this way, to try to come to terms with this basic way we manipulate or regulate others in our life, and also then become manipulated and regulated by that process. The other thing that Tibetans then like to do, and in the Lojong tradition, is to meditate how all living beings are really beneficial for us. Nobody's really harmful. Everyone's actually beneficial in one way or another. And so to meditate or contemplate all the benefits we get from others, how we couldn't be alive. Like in America, all Jewish people dislike their mothers, and all white Anglo-Saxon Protestants dislike their fathers. This kind of goes without saying. It's like if Las Vegas was taking a bet, if a Jewish person and a WASP walked into a casino and they were taking a bet on which one disliked the mother and which one disliked the father, that would be a 10-to-1 bet right there. And so we sort of try to come to terms with what we're doing, and instead look at how all beings are kind to us. So from point of view of mother and father, there may be problems with them, but we got this body thanks to them. And from everything we eat and everything we own and everything we do, there's an element of kindness there. In other words, someone made your coats. You may not, Tibetans, because China invaded Tibet, they don't much like the Chinese for invading Tibet. But at the same time, they have to contemplate the benefits. They got to practice patience. All of their temples and libraries were all burned and destroyed, so they got to rebuild them all again. So there's always a positive spin-off comes from every negativity. And like the Dalai Lama often says, we Tibetans, China, for us, we can see a lot of kindness, a benefit for us, because of it we get to practice patience, and we get to practice forgiveness, and we get to practice, and so on and so forth. That everything happens in life can be a kind of a benefit, can have a benefit to us. For instance, in the Buddhist world, if someone steals something from us, we very quickly think, I give it to him. So they don't actually steal it. Because we think, well, why would someone steal something from us? Obviously, we must have some karmic connection with that person. Otherwise, what's the possibility of them bumping into us and being able to steal from us? I mean, there's so many beings in the world. There must be a connection. So obviously, if that person steals $100 from me, I must owe that guy $100 from some time or another. So immediately we think, I give it. And secondly, we think, well, that person obviously is a little irritating. You don't really want someone to steal from you. And if a debt is from like a few lifetimes ago, you kind of hope there would be that like 7-year clemency clause would come in there. But it doesn't always, does it? Sometimes, the IRS comes after someone for things that they noticed from years and years ago and so on. And to contemplate, they like to contemplate how, well, although that person did do something mean to me, from my side there has to be something there for that to happen. In the West we have that expression, takes two to tango. So from our way of thinking of it, in the Lojong tradition, even if someone beats me up or robs me or something like that, from my side, even though it's a multiple lifetime thing, there's some kind of connection there. And so to think of that connection as that event is a way of kind of repairing that relationship. That it's kind of, from my side, a purification of my karma. And from that person's side, if I just respond with a relaxed mind and I send out bodhisattva thoughts of forgiveness and this perfection of the 6 perfections, the third one, the perfection of often called patience, but it really means a kind of forgiveness of anything that happens. Doesn't mean you let bad things happen, that you can't stand up and correct them if you have the ability to do so. If you're carrying a machine gun and someone attacks you with a water pistol, it does give you an advantage, and you can purify that karma in a different way. But it means things that happen to us, to always try to have in our own mind a forgiving outcome to the past events and things that are inevitable. Inevitable means, walking down the street, like a friend of mine was in India and walking down the street in Calcutta, and 2 guys walked by him and hit him from behind with a club and knocked him down and stole his wallet and ran away. So there's nothing to do about it, is it? I mean, you can cry over spilt milk, you can be angry at them, but it doesn't help. So basically, by just thinking, well, I give them that wallet. Sure, they hit me on the head, but at least they didn't kill me. Thank you, guys. I mean, they could have harvested my organs and sold them to some, to try to have a positive feeling towards that person, a forgiving feeling towards that person. Shantideva, who's always quoted in the Lojong tradition, says people always do everything someone does, absolutely everything, is always in the search for happiness. So when that people hit you on the head and rob you, it's really, they just want happiness. They see happiness as being your wallet in their pocket. So why did they do it? It's kind of a mistaken way for happiness, isn't it? So should you be angry at someone or have a resentment or have a negative feeling for someone just because they have a mistaken approach to happiness? Because we all have the right to search for happiness. Now, what we don't have the right to do is do so, of course, in a wrong way. But if we look at our own life, many of us search for happiness in ways which don't always bring happiness. Shantideva says, everyone's running for hoping for happiness, but they don't know the right causes, so they don't actually get happy. And then nobody wants suffering, but they don't know the technology of getting away from stress and suffering and pain and unhappiness. Like many times you meet men or women who say, every relationship I've had has always ended badly. You notice like somehow it's a big mystery. It's quite simple. One is looking for happiness and doesn't know the causes. One is looking not to be broken-hearted in the next relation, but doesn't know the causes of not ending up broken-hearted. And so in that way, from Bodhisattva way of thinking, Lojong, we can't really say that something is anyone, we can't really blame anyone for getting things wrong. You know, but of course, we can try to correct them. We should defend ourselves. If someone attacks you, then you happen to have a stick and they have a stick, then if your stick is bigger than their stick, then it's an okay situation. But if you don't have the bigger stick, later, it really is just a matter that they followed the wrong course of a kind of an unsophisticated manner of seeking happiness, isn't it? And they couldn't have hit me on the head with a stick if I didn't have some connection. There's a lot of heads out there. How many steps did I take in my lifetime to bring me right to that corner on my own power, walking step by step to that corner where I got hit on the head with a stick? I played some part in that by being there on a kind of an energetic level or a karmic level. And what can I learn from it? What's that expression? Anything doesn't kill me makes me stronger. This is kind of the idea that everything in the universe is always kind. Even things that kill us are kind because, you know, this life has its ups and downs. Maybe next time I'll be better off. I mean, this lifetime, I was born like half Irish, and the other half was some British and some Micmac or Iroquois Indian. So next time maybe I'll be pure Irish. Or whatever. This life I was born in a middle-class family. Maybe next time I'll be born as like the head of Samsung. When we develop a kind of a way of looking at the positive side of everything, it's like a friend of mine in Malaysia, a student of mine in Malaysia. She was living in Scotland at the time, and she and her husband had a child, and after 3 weeks the child died, and she was very upset about it. And so she asked me what kind of contemplations or meditations to do. And I said, well, you know, you should of course, it's always sad to lose a child, and no mother will lose a child and not feel sad about it. But it's also important to understand that when that child was in your womb, you were a mother. And for 3 weeks, you were a mother. For 3 weeks, you felt that love of a mother. And the child got to be in your womb. And when you meditated, when the child was in your womb, that child had some kind of meditation experience, didn't it? And even after the child's born, it had certain kind of blessings. They took it to lamas and had the hair snipped and had some blessing. So 3 weeks, we can think 3 weeks is like nothing. But in reality, it's something, isn't it? From the mother's side, she had a very deep experience. From the child's side, a very deep experience. We tend to think long life is always better, but Mozart died at age 34, and he actually accomplished more than, I don't know, Ronald Reagan did in 90 years or something, or many, many beings. Now, when any High Lama dies, even if they die in childhood, they always say, and then at age 3, he completed his destiny to benefit those beings who were on the planet at that time, and therefore he withdrew the mysterious theater of his body, speech, and mind emanations and went on to the next job. So even things that kill, actually, are a kind of a part of the process, isn't it? part of the process of our evolution. I mean, everyone here is going to die, and everyone here is going to have many, many friends who die before they die, and have many family members probably, or cousins, even if they're like 50th cousin. It's part of life. So the idea of always cherishing self above others and seeing things in this kind of my happiness is always posited on a particular circumstance. In Lojong is considered the most important of the first training. Meditating on the kindness of everything, or the possible benefits we can get from every single thing, and how all living beings, good, bad, and indifferent, actually bring some benefit, even if they don't think they're benefiting. You know, I like to mention with Adolf Hitler, what a nice guy he was. Because if it weren't for him, my dad wouldn't have joined the army in Canada, wouldn't have gone to Europe to shoot Germans. And then never would have met my mom, who was British, because after the war he settled in England and he met my mom. And in fact, most North Americans born after World War II are much, much better looking than they actually otherwise would have been, because not only did Hitler bring our men over there to join the war, and many women, but also the war killed off a lot of the good-looking young Europeans. And so it was very easy for North Americans, kind of ugly ones, to get very beautiful wives at that time. And my dad wasn't so good-looking, he wasn't so tall, anything like that. He wasn't from an especially high aristocratic family. My mom was from an aristocratic family, extremely beautiful. And so thanks to Hitler, my dad could marry my mom. And I have this body of mine. I came into this lifetime. Otherwise, I'd be floating around the bardo in some hell realm or ghost realm waiting for like an appropriate incarnation. Of course, we shouldn't be apathetic about negativity. We shouldn't be non-confrontational about negativity. We shouldn't be, you know, I think we could say that the bodhisattva vow is to protect all beings. So it doesn't mean we should be quiet or lazy in the face of the negativity of others, that we shouldn't stand up for goodness and righteousness and things like this in a very forceful way. But we should do it with equal kind of humanity towards both sides of every equation. So a soldier fighting may have to fight, but he should understand that those soldiers on the other side are equally human beings, are equally searching happiness, equally put in a slightly difficult position. People who are, you know, loud and rude and reckless and obnoxious, they don't actually want to be loud, rude, reckless, and obnoxious. They just don't have the training, or they don't have the wisdom, or they don't have the good karma to be less loud, less rude, and less obnoxious. And because of that, rather than be objects of aversion, or objects of anger, or objects of dislike, they should really be objects of our compassion, shouldn't they? They should be objects of our caring. Shantideva, one of my favorite verses from him, says, if there's a problem and you can fix it, don't worry, just fix it. If there's a problem and you can't fix it, don't worry, you can't fix it. Just live happily with it, however it is. This is often quoted in Lojong because we can't fix every other situation in the world. There's many situations we cannot personally fix. We can't end world hunger, we can't end world violence, we can't end world poverty, and so on. You know, these things are bigger than any one individual at any one moment. I mean, perhaps if we're reborn as a universal dictator, we will be able to fix those kind of things. We still can't fix tsunamis, and we still can't fix, you know, pestilences and diseases and everything. So Shantideva's comment was that we have to be kind of patient in our compassion, patient in our caring, patient in our love. Now, Tibetans also like to think all living beings were my mother in a previous life. And therefore, at the time as my mother, they carried me and they gave birth to me and had pain for me. And so when they talk about another person, they don't say other people. They always say Masamchen, mother sentient beings, all mother sentient beings, all beings who have been my mother. So the next time someone's rude to you, just think, oh, that was my mother in a previous life. Or if they're a little mean to you, mother in a previous life, she still didn't learn. But at the same time, just as your mother in this life is a little rude or a little difficult, you don't hate her for it, or you don't like beat her for it or something like that. You try to have a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of warmth and maybe a prayer that she'll improve. So it's the same with all living beings, to try to cultivate that. Just to end, what I wanted to say is I had the good fortune to help in Atlanta in the establishing of a Buddhist center that later we were able to get affiliation with Emory University. And as part of that, they were able to start with Emory medical research on the benefits of different kinds of meditation. And Emory, they cooperated with Madison, with Harvard, and with Stanford in that research program. And they all kind of looked at different aspects of meditation. And I think Harvard mostly looked at kind of extra normal physical things. And Madison looked at sort of benefits on things like stress and heart rate and things like that, heart health, things like that, mostly from Vipassana style meditations and Zen style meditations, this kind. Atlanta specialized at looking at this compassion meditation, all living beings once my mother, to develop this kind of attitude towards all beings. And they noticed that within 6 weeks of doing the meditation for 15 minutes a day, the vagus nerve, which runs from the crown, from the brain to the thyroid, then down to the heart and to the adrenals, that this energy or activity almost doubled. And so with just 6 weeks, the results were very, very strong. Whereas other meditations didn't show such, they showed different kind of results, but they didn't affect the vagus nerve. Therefore, that vagus nerve now in America has become known as the compassion nerve. But it's the bodhisattva nerve, something like that. So the first Dalai Lama says, for most people, training first in the love, compassion, the bodhisattva spirit brings quick results. For those of high karma from previous lives, then teach the emptiness side first, or the secret side first. In the 7-point mind training, this is called the real training. On the basic, before that, we do the preliminaries, which is things like meditate on impermanence, on Guru Yoga, things like this, developing a relationship with a teacher, how to treat a teacher properly, how to behave around a teacher so as to get the teaching from the teacher and not just like hang out and become buddies or something like that. And sort of meditations on karma, cause effect, sort of on self-discipline, these kind of things. And then supportive practices, what to do in post-meditation. So in that way, it's given seven steps. I did a couple of books on it in the West, and of the 30 books I've written, one of them is amongst my favorites. It's called Meditations to Transform the Mind. It's a book on such kind of thought process and thought processing based on a set of poems by the 7th Dalai Lama. Meditations to Transform the Mind. Books in the West tend to be in and out of print a lot these days because of the internet phenomena, but usually even when they're out of print, you can find them for a few years through all of the subsidiary booksellers. So I think we'll stop there for now, and then we'll meditate for a minute, or questions and answers first. Which would you like first? Q&A. Okay, then we can have a discussion. Now you're lucky because being Irish, I'm not shy about anything, so you can ask absolutely anything. And I'm not shy to speak about it even in front of the Buddha. As everyone knows, the Buddha was actually Irish. Yeah, you know, but before Buddha was born, some Irish people were traveling through India. Yeah, no? Buddha always looks a little Irish, don't you think? Okay, so points of questions or answers or discussions? And because I know everything, you can even ask me like lotto numbers and stuff like this.
Please feel free to ask questions.
Yes?
I just want to ask in practicing Tibetan practicing, what point do you think people have been enlightened?
What point, what?
People think this person is enlightened.
Oh, what point is someone enlightened? Well, so the question is, in Tibetan tradition, when people practice Dharma, at what point do you become enlightened? Because Tibetan Buddhism is based on Indian Buddhism, then it's basically the thought of Nagarjuna and Asanga, that we start out as ordinary beings, and then we notice that other people, at the beginning we're kind of selfish, like we'll go out and rob and kill to get our own foods and stuff, and we'll be random and kind of selfish. But then we notice that other living beings also are sentient just like us and connected to us. So then when you notice that to the point that you like others as much as you like yourself, that's the beginning of the Buddhist path. As long as you like yourself more than you like others, or care for yourself more than you care for others, you're not on the first Mahayana path. That first path is called Soglam in Tibetan, which means the path of collection. From that time on, you collect two things. One is you grow in two things. One is you collect wisdom of how emptiness and appearance, you could say a wisdom of the middle way, wisdom of the center. Things arise and appear in your mind, but they don't exist in the manner of their appearance. They're always contextualized to where you are at that time, or where your personal perspective. And the emptiness in infinity side is how that appearance has no findable nature, is no real nature, no separate nature. So the appearance side is like theater, and if you look at the theater, there's no such thing. Like you dream of a dog, but there's no dog. You look at a person and you think they're a thief, but in fact they're not a thief. But in your mind they're a thief. But no matter how much you look in that person, you don't find the thief, etc. So now that's on one side, and on the other side, the collection of bodhisattva energies, of good karma, merit, something like that. And so it starts of those two, and that's called Soglam. You go across that, you come to Jorlam. And Jorlam is the path of connectedness. In your meditation, you get a direct experience of emptiness, a kind of a glimmering experience of the infinity nature. Then you deepen that, and you come to Tonglam. Tonglam is the path of direct seeing. In your meditation, you have complete experience of the infinity nature. But when you come out of meditation and you walk around, there's still some duality. You look at someone, you don't say, hello, Mr. Infinity, or hello, Madame Infinity. You still have a sense of duality. So when you're in meditation, you can see the infinity nature, but out of meditation, you don't. And when you're in seeing the infinity nature in meditation, you don't see the relative conventional appearance. You alternate between the two. So the fourth path is integration. You go across the 10 bodhisattva bhumis when those two become more and more integrated. Sometimes called the path of meditation, but it really means integration. Each stage, or a little bit more emptiness and appearance become closer, emptiness and theater. So in your meditation, You keep a grip on conventionalities, and in your conventionalities you keep a deeper grip. And then you come to Kechikma, the last moment, and kaboom, enlightened. Enlightened, just like me. That's an Irish expression, enlightened like me. So you could say the enlightenment in the tradition of Nagarjuna and Asanga, as it comes to Tibet, means the fulfillment of the bodhisattva path, both in wisdom and in merit. Wisdom or positive energy, something like that. So a Buddha is someone who sees how nothing has independent nature or separate self-nature, but at the same time appreciates the appearing nature, fully appreciates the appearing nature. And from the conventional side, experiences only warmth and love, compassion for all living beings. One way is put like that. Another way is said, enlightenment is the fulfillment of the fulfillment of universal love, the fulfillment of universal wisdom, and the fulfillment of universal power. One's body becomes complete compassion, one's mind becomes complete wisdom, and one's spirit becomes perfect in power. Sakyamuni, Muni literally means power in Sanskrit, the name for Buddha. But not power over anything, but self-powered or autonomous power, something like that. Everyone agree with those two definitions? I went to the Dalai Lama's debate school for a couple of years, so I'm very good at arguments.
Any other questions?
Yes, go ahead. Oh, thank you.
I'm not sure I'm phrasing this properly right of what you said, but looking for the positive in experiences. Sometimes life brings us experiences that are extremely difficult and hard to find peace after that, such as if a child was murdered, a loved one commits suicide, someone breaks into grandma's house and beats her, and she's never able to walk again.
Yeah, yeah.
How does one find the positive in the result of so devastating?
Yes, I think the more dramatic the situation, the more difficult it is, obviously, to find peace with it. In the case of my Malaysian friend, whose baby died at age 3, I consoled her that by saying she would get pregnant within 6 months or so again, and the child, she would have a happy, healthy child who would live a normal life. And I asked her to eat a globule of butter, and then when the baby was born, to look at the baby's head, and there would be a yellow smear right at the very crown of the head to show that it was the same baby and the same spirit. So I think that helped her a lot in that, when the baby is gone, there's nothing you can do. You can't bring it back. Buddha, there's a story with Buddha where he's passing through a village and a mother says to him, "My baby has died. Please use your power to bring the baby back to life." And he says, "Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Go to a house and bring me a handful of rice from a house where no one has died, and I'll do the ritual." And she runs to the house, and going through those, she's unable to find a house where nobody has died. And then she understands that, in fact, impermanence is part and parcel of human experience. In the Buddhist tradition, I think, we start we start by meditating upon the suffering of unenlightened existence, the way in which the 8 great sufferings fall like rain in this world. We have the suffering of birth, the suffering of sickness, suffering of old age, sufferings of death, and then sufferings of not getting things we want or need, and then the suffering of getting things we don't want and we don't need. And these are part and parcel of human experience. So obviously the more difficult, 2 things I think. One is the more difficult circumstance, the more difficult to forgive. And secondly, I think from the point of view of our own noticing the prevalence of such phenomena in the world, becomes more difficult for us to accept it. One of my daughters was once sexually molested, and it disturbed her a lot. Needless to, and she was just 10 or 11 years old or something. So I asked her to contemplate the events in places of war. And in particular at that time there were a lot of terrible events happening in Somalia and Africa and in the Congo and the Sudan. And, people not only being molested but being raped, being murdered, being beaten and sold into slavery and so on. The 7th Dalai Lama said that if we feel very low, we should look down at worse things, and it'll sort of it'll lift up our spirit. If we're feeling very high, we should look up at beings above, and it'll help us with our humility. So I don't think there's any way to, short of enlightenment, I think there's no way to fully forgive someone beating up your grandmother. But on the other hand, we have to understand that beings do what they do based on their wisdom factor. So if someone has such a low wisdom factor that they beat up someone's grandmother, it's very difficult. Just like when Ronald Reagan was shot, and he did an interview, they said, "Are you upset with that person who shot you? Are you angry at him?" And Ronald said, "Well, I heard his elevator didn't go all the way to the top story." So how can you be angry at someone who doesn't know what they're doing, that they're crazy? And that was kind of a Buddhist thing to say. He obviously had a Buddhist advisor. But in the Buddhist world, we think that delusion and karma, klesha and karma, the 2 things that drive people to do stupid or seemingly evil things, are like sicknesses or afflictions. When someone rapes someone, it's because their skills in, courting are very minimum. And they're driven also by karma and klesha, some kind of delusion of the mind. So it's a kind of sickness. Having said that, there has never, to my knowledge, been a Buddhist country traditionally that did not have the death sentence. So although we forgive beings, historically, for their weaknesses in a spiritual way, they don't necessarily become seen to be part of human society for very long. There have been a few Buddhist countries that tried no death sentence, but it's rarely lasted more than a few years or a decade or so. The Buddhist thinking, I think, in the Buddhist countries, there's 2 things. There's what monks think and nuns think. So the worst that happens to a monk or nun is you kick them out of the monastery. But a king and the legal system has a whole different way of looking at things. So you can't so instead of kicking them out of the monastery, we kick them out of human society by sending them back to the bardo and letting them start over. Go back to go. Do not pass, no, go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200 and start again. So it's the same, I think, in the Buddhist world. Like in Tibet, every household by law had to own guns. There was only a standing army of 2,000, and every household should be expected to be fairly self-defendable. And if an army invaded, then much like Switzerland, every family should be able to provide one gunman or gunwoman. So at the same time of talking about forgiveness and compassion and so on, there is a strong commitment both to self-responsibility in ensuring your own welfare and the welfare of your loved ones, and a strong sense of the better situation for society. I think the logic for the death sentence is often that if you keep such people in prison all their lives, you'll ruin your prison systems, and prison no longer becomes a rehabilitation factor. It just becomes a hotbed for breeding more violent criminals. But that's from Buddhist history point. Whenever I mention that in Buddhist centers in the West tends to be anti-capital punishment, Western Buddhist centers. So they always go, oh, Lama Glen, you shouldn't say that, blah, 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 blah. The Dalai Lama says blah, 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 blah. I say, yeah, but the Dalai Lama's a monk, and Tibet only ever had non-capital punishment for 12 years in its whole history. And even then, the minute that Dalai Lama died, they brought it back. So I think that's an important point to remember, is that, you know, the Buddhists talk of the Bodhisattva way and compassion and forgiveness. Even though someone may be put to death, you're not thinking, I'm not forgiving him, and you're not thinking, I'm punishing him. You're thinking you're giving him a new chance to start again. And that's been a kind of a feature, I think. One time in the West, in America, I was asked to give a talk at the Naval Academy in Montgomery, Alabama, on why Buddhist countries have managed to produce soldiers who don't suffer much from post-traumatic stress syndrome. So they'll fight a war, but they won't be totally scarred by it. And I think one of the reasons is there is a strong cultivation in the Buddhist world, even with the military, traditionally, that those soldiers you're fighting are to be respected, and to try to harm as less as possible. But if it's a confrontation, then that's that. It goes, but not to hate and not to not have forgiveness. And I think that's important throughout all things in life. Yeah. Yes. Hold on, microphone.
You mentioned one key to the enlightenment was to like the others more than liking yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, is it possible to be enlightened or to become, let's say, very fully happiness if the others are not happy or if the others are not enlightened? Is it possible to reach that?
Oh yeah, very easy. Boom, done. Well, you see, in the Indo-Tibetan Mahayana tradition, we make the prayer at the beginning of a meditation that I engage in this meditation in order to become a fully enlightened being as a way to be of greater benefit in the world. So I think the Buddhist thinking is that our part of the universe is kind of like a training ground. People come here to get a notch up on the evolutionary ladder. Then when you graduate, you get a little bit of a better world with less violence, less killing, less disease, less catastrophe, that sort of stuff. This is kind of like a training ground. And there's training grounds lower than ours and training grounds above ours, something like that. But enlightenment, the traditional scriptures from India say, a bodhisattva thinks in one of three ways. I push everyone to enlightenment, and like a shepherd sending the sheep home, I come in last. Or like a boat captain, we all go together to enlightenment. Or like a king, I ride to enlightenment first, and then I lead everyone there. So the Asanga points out in his texts, the great Asanga, that this is just a way of thinking about it fitted to one of the three kinds of personalities. In reality, you have to go to enlightenment first, like the king, and then you can lead people to enlightenment, or then you can help people. But there is a kind of a personality who thinks it's nice to walk behind. And then there's like the captain of a boat who is very gregarious. You like to go there like a big herd of buffaloes or a pack of dogs or something like that. But in reality, you never get everyone on a boat to achieve enlightenment at the same moment. Statistically, Las Vegas would put a very long odds against a bet on that ever happening. So the idea is we should be like the king who goes to a queen, goes to enlightenment, and then from that enlightenment we can uplift the world. If we look back over the history of human experience, wisdom has been a primary factor in elevating human society. And those beings who achieve deeper wisdom basically lift up society. And beings of little wisdom who manage to grab control here and there tend to create a less harmonious, happy, successful world. So yeah, the Tibetan and the Indian idea is any human being with full sense faculties and has the 18 conditions can achieve enlightenment in this lifetime. Of course, not everyone does. So we're running out of time because we have to finish at 10 to 4 to clear the hall for the next session. So we'll meditate for 10 minutes.